and then to come this evening on a very busy holiday week. Thank you. Thank you so much. And I want to say personally how much I love just sitting here and looking at every one of you. I've known every one of you for years, and it's just making my heart so appreciative of what you've done for the city.
We lost out.
I should have known there would be some trouble.
To know us is to hate us.
Well, welcome, and I'm going to immediately turn this over to, I believe Annie is going to start things off, and Chad Freeman is here, and we're all ears.
Okay.
Okay.
Good evening and thank you. I'm Annie Gorski. I'm the city's economic development manager. I'm here with Chad Freeman, president of SEDCOR, and tonight our goal is to give you an update on economic development activities and tell you what's coming down the pike, activities that we're working on in the future, and to have a discussion. Before we do that, I want to highlight some of the things on your table that we gave you. The SEDCOR annual plan is in front of you. We also have something titled Grow, which is a piece that highlights some of our target sectors in Salem and some of the companies that we've worked with and the resources that they've used. And then we also have a new colorful piece that says hello again at the top. We're going to be talking more at the end about our work with startup businesses. This is a new focus for us, and this is modeled after the pub talks in Portland and Bend. Really a chance for startup businesses, investors, and others to get together and network and information share. So the next event is on December 8th. So that's also on your table. So just to refresh for you, as you're aware, we contract annually with SEDCOR to assist with marketing and outreach of our industrial lands, including a key focus at the Mill Creek Corporate Center. And we work with them to assist with business retention and expansion, business recruitment, as well as management of the city's enterprise zone. We don't do this alone. We rely on a variety of partnerships, not only with SEDCOR, but with our local utilities, our workforce providers, real estate community, Business Oregon, and a variety of others. We connect businesses with a suite of financial and technical resources, but not everything we do requires funding. We're going to give some examples tonight of ways that we've helped businesses without funding involved. Although our incentives are limited, they are helping to create and retain jobs, generate new tax revenue for the city, and to improve economic conditions for Salem families. Last year, the city funded $200,000 for the SEDCOR contract, and through that partnership, we leveraged $42 million in private investment, and that includes construction that's underway right now at the Mill Creek Corporate Center with Henningsen Cold Storage. So you'll hear a lot tonight. The conversation is around leveraging as well.
Great, thanks, Annie. And I think as Annie and I were talking, we realized we've done these, I think this is the third joint council work session that we've done, and recognizing that what we'd like to do is talk a little bit about economic development, but then have a little bit more of discussion and open discussion and ideas. But I thought maybe even just to start that, if we could do a quick round of introductions, just make sure that I think everybody's on the same page. We'd like to introduce my board. Always nice to introduce your board, and then maybe go around the council as well, just for a quick round if we could. So Brent, you want to get us?
I'm Brent DeHart. I have two enterprises in town. I have a Northwestern Mutual Financial Services practice, and I'm the proprietor of the vendor at the Salem Airport for fuel.
Hello, Teresa Haskins. I am business market manager for Portland General Electric. My day job is up in Portland, but I live here in Salem and have been active for many years.
Daryl Knox. I'm a CPA and a partner with AKT CPAs. As you can guess, I serve as the treasurer of the board.
Lucky guys.
Yeah, you get pointed for that right away when you're a CPA. I'm also involved in 2 family construction companies and a grass seed farm in the South Valley as well.
Good evening. I'm Patricia Callahan Bowman, and I own the Express Employment Professionals office here in town, so I put people to work.
Good evening. Rich Duncan Construction. I build stuff.
Mark Hoyt, Sherman, Johnny, and Hoyt. I tear stuff apart.
I'm Chuck Bennett. I'm City Councilor for Ward 1 and Mayor-elect of Salem.
Congrats.
I'm Tom Anderson. I'm city councilor for Ward 2. My day job is a litigator. I'm a workers' compensation defense attorney and have been for, gosh, I'm in my 40th year as being a lawyer. So I think I beat Mark.
Brad Nanke, City Council Ward 3, and during the day I do environmental health safety for Panasonic Eco Solutions Solar America LLC. What a long name. We tried to get it shorter, but
somebody in Tokyo said no, I think. Yeah. Hi, Steve McCoy, City Councilor in Ward 4. I'm retired. My career was in management of trade associations for the grocery industry and the Restaurant and Lodging Association.
Daniel Benjamin, Ward 6, Northeast Side. Day job, I work in sales on Power Nissan and the Power Auto Group.
Warren Benars, Ward 7. Daytime, I'm a real estate investor, quite a bit of real estate here in Salem, and I'm also part owner in Gem Equipment of Oregon, a food processing manufacturer out of Woodburn and Mount Angel.
Hello, everybody. Again, I'm Anna Peterson, Salem Mayor for 6 years. I will soon be out of a job. I'm very pleased about that. And Councilor Bennett is going to carry on and be a really fine mayor, so you'll be working with him in the future. Welcome, everybody.
Steve Bauer, City Manager and SEDCOR Executive Council member, Executive Committee members.
Great, thanks. Yeah, wearing multiple hats. Well, and thanks for that. I think really part of that, my thought was recognizing that both of these organizations are really supported by so much of the time and the talent that's in this room in terms of the insights and the volunteer hours, which is all done for the big pay and dinner. So we appreciate that, and we're really only as strong as you guys can help take us. So I appreciate it, guys and gals, obviously as well. So with that, we talked to Annie, get an intro a little bit about the partnership. Obviously, our job at SEDCOR is to help on the economic development for the region. Region is Marion, Polk, and Yamhill counties. And you can see on this slide, there's 4 organizations like us across the state who really work regionally to help grow jobs. There's a list of some of the tools and what we do to help companies grow. But I think one of the biggest things is, when I look at this slide, is defining what economic development is. The first part of that is we're here to try to grow jobs and investment in our communities. But the biggest part, as I've realized lately, is to build the community behind that. I mean, that ultimately is our job, that we believe that the best way to do that is by building jobs. One of the stories that has really driven this home to me lately was, I think a lot of us have been a part or heard of the Garmin's expansion. So a little bit of background, though. Garmin came to us the opportunity to expand. I believe they were looking at adding 100 jobs here they were evaluating whether they do it here in Salem or in a couple other facilities across the U.S. In working with the city, SEDCOR, and the state, we were able to help those jobs happen here. A great economic development story. I can categorize that in terms of jobs. I said approximately 100 jobs with average wages in the $80,000 range. Living good, strong living wage jobs. We've got good local investment. But I think on that community piece, what's really been driven home to me, even in the last year, is we got a call from a friend of mine who said, "Hey, my son is looking for a job in the region. He wants to come back. He's got a degree in engineering, been working all over the U.S., is looking for opportunities. And I know that Garmin's just done some expansions." Since that time, that individual was able to move back, bring his whole family back, is expecting his second child, and building a house here in Salem. And it's that story that I think so often, when I'm a numbers guy, I like looking at spreadsheets, they make things really neat and tidy. But it's those stories of being able to have kids coming back here, having their kids, having the third generation come back. And I think that really defines what we do at SEDCOR, and what our job really is. These are tools, these are tactics, but our job is to keep growing that investment in those jobs and those skills so that the next generation can at least has the opportunity to be here as well. So how do we do that? And we start with, I mentioned the Garmin example. Here we've got example of the companies that are here. We believe it's better to come from a position of strength. So we work on this graph. You can see, the blue, I can't read that very clear, but the blue is government services, about 35%. That's about double most cities in terms of percentage. Obviously a strength, obviously something that that we can work with, but still probably, we're not going to spend a lot of time, trying to help and grow that sector, obviously. The piece that we focus on, heard some chuckles over there, that manufacturing production, we really look at even getting somewhere into the medical services sector. Those are about the 10 to 12% of what we term traded sector jobs are that we're going to work. And with the traded sector jobs, a little bit of a YouTube here to kind of explain, when we talk about traded sector, what that is and why we focus on it. I think one of our key pieces are always that we're trying to grow these jobs, and that we found that the strength is to continue to grow from our existing base.
You really cannot create an economy, you really cannot have an economic strategy if you don't really understand the importance of primary jobs and how primary jobs are really the sole provider of economic development. Primary jobs are those jobs, and they can be either a product or service, but they are a product or service that has value added to them. And that product or service is then exported out of your respective geography. What they're doing is importing wealth back into your community. So that product or service gets sold, that money then comes into your community. Primary jobs don't come just from manufacturing. Primary jobs come from any kind of a value-added service or product that gets exported. Now, the counterpart of that are the secondary jobs. And the secondary jobs are those jobs that serve that existing economy that you have created. The difference between the two primarily focuses on one being a wealth creator and the other being a wealth circulator. That tends to make people think, well, then secondary jobs are not important, but they are. Because a business or an individual is a consumer, and they need suppliers to their business, they need services, individuals need groceries, they need retail products, they buy automobiles. If you create primary jobs, you create an economic market. When you do that, secondary jobs automatically occur. There are always businesses out there who will come serve a market that developed. If you focus on the creation of secondary jobs, that will never lead to the creation of a primary job. So primary jobs are very critical to begin the economic development process. Without it, it does not happen. If an economy does not have traded sector employers, then you have an economy that eventually is just going to die and go away. The way to really graphically think about this is think about your economy as a bucket of water. And your objective in economic development is to continually pour more water into that bucket and grow that economy. But every economy, unlike every bucket, has holes in it. And there is leakage occurring in every economy. So keep in mind, as you're pouring water into this bucket by creating more primary jobs, you're also experiencing leakage, meaning there are companies, there are individuals in your economy who can't get everything they need in your economy. So they have to go outside of your economy and make purchases. If you're not putting more water into the bucket, eventually it will all drain out. And so if you don't focus on these primary jobs, then your economy will get stale. And if there are no traded sector jobs in your community, then eventually the bucket dries up. In the economic development world, and you can take the U.S. as an example, there are about 2,500 to 3,000 primary job location announcements that occur annually. There's about 25 to 30,000 economic development organizations trying to get those jobs. So the annual ratio there is 1 in 10, meaning you have a 1 in 10 chance of some kind of positive primary job activity to occur in your particular region. If you choose to play those odds and you choose that you're not going to have an active economic development effort, those are horrible odds. The communities who go down that road tend to be the ones who struggle consistently. economically. They're not growing. They have tax problems. They have revenue issues. They have declining quality of services in their community, and generally a deterioration of the quality of life.
So stark message there, but I think really the key is this is why primary jobs or traded sector jobs and why we focus on those really is it's not all, we certainly believe that all jobs are important. It's just that in terms of job creation, it's easier to, it's easier to create one primary job that can yield more secondary jobs rather than as we just saw. Sir.
I don't know if you want questions now or.
Sure.
Okay. I'm looking at this pie chart, and I see the manufacturing is 5% of all the jobs. So the spread out sheet, I'm sure that would equal to whatever that is, 5,541 jobs without my reading glasses. I think that's what it is. So I understand how you said in Salem, because we're the state capital, our government sector is higher than a normal town of our size. My question is our manufacturing sector lower than a normal town of our size, or is there any equivalence between that?
Yeah, great question. And
thank you.
The numbers for the state of Oregon are 11 or 12% in terms of for manufacturing jobs across the state. So we're a little bit lower. In many ways, I guess I've looked at Salem because of the impact of government and this corresponding increase in service sector jobs is maybe a rough equivalent for mine is 2 times as many jobs. So everything else is about half. Okay. If that makes sense.
So the government sector being here is helpful vis-a-vis the fact that our manufacturing is down from what the average is.
Well, reason.
It could be the reason too. Yeah. I mean, it's both.
It's the reason. It's both, and I think the nice part about that, one of the strong assets from that, is it creates some stability in terms of for
those jobs.
Economic,
yeah. Now what we need to do is get to people who, not like Teresa, who work in Portland and live here, but the people who work here and live in Portland.
And I think we are starting to really see more and more of that. Just
I agree with that. I think the downtown has a lot to do with that.
We're going to talk about that in a minute, how it's all part of that big picture. Yep.
So traded sector, I think we've identified, these are some key industries for us, really where we either have proven strengths or where there's some strong connections and maybe a little bit of aspiration, but really, some of these I think will probably look pretty familiar to folks. Here, we talked about that traded sector. The key piece that I think they were trying to make there was that multiplier effect. As you bring in new employers, mentioned Panasonic and some of their supply chain opportunities here, some of the other work that come are created through those jobs subsequently as well. So how do we do, what's that? Oh, sorry.
That's fine. I don't think I was limited to the one, but you might want to cut me off after this. I'm looking at the wages that you say are average 21% higher. I presume you're talking about average wages as opposed to the median wage, because I think the average wage would be brought up by the executives from the company who are there as opposed to someone else. So do you have figures as to the median wages, meaning, half above that point earn more than that and half earn less than that?
I don't have those numbers off the top.
That's something I'm sure we can find those.
Yeah,
the point is here, these are higher wage jobs.
Well, I understand that.
Yeah.
But I don't know if they're really 21% when you look at what most of the people are making. That was only my question.
Happy to follow up.
Thanks.
Yeah. So strategic plan in terms of how do we work it, and how do we work on economic development? Annie touched on one of the key words we do here is obviously is partnership. Whether we're working directly here to the city of Salem, whether we're working across the region, how do we bring in with the state, with the utility partners, others? This really is a team sport, and recognizing that our goal is always to help private companies succeed in terms of adding jobs. We know very well that we don't add those jobs. So goal is always, and I think part of it with economic development, it gets categorized as in just the recruitment piece. 85% of our work is spent helping local companies of all sizes grow, and that really is the key of our work. And over the last 4 years, we've done roughly $200 million of projects. We've been a part of roughly $200 million of expansion of work in the last 4 years. I believe it's about $140 million of that has been from existing companies. And so that's really clear. I'm not really bright, but if you keep getting it drubbed into your head, even I can get it, and that's where we're seeing that job growth. We do, but the recruitment's definitely another important piece, I think, both from what we do as well as from a general economic health. It brings in new ideas, new innovation, new revenue, and particularly with some of the assets that we see here in Salem, most notably the Mill Creek Corporate Center, we've got an asset that nobody else has, and just some of the size of some of the projects, as we're even seeing now with a $30 million first phase project going on out there, those are sizable investments to take on. Telling the region's story, basic marketing, both internally as well as just how do we internally to the region to try to continue the supply chain growth, as well as outside using site selectors and real estate professionals, among other avenues, and then just growing the business network. And this is something at SEDCOR, as you guys are well aware of, we're a public-private partnership. About half of our resources come from the private sector, going back to the leverage conversation. And part of that really comes around the benefit as a membership community as well, that we see with about 380 private members as well. So that's, in very broad brush, what we're doing and how we're working to try to create this community here in the city and in the region.
So just to build on that, several city council goals also guide our economic development activities, having a variety of housing options, having good roads and infrastructure, having recreational amenities, and a thriving downtown all contribute to our economic development goals and objectives. Certainly, we hear that time and time again, both from existing companies. We've mentioned Garmin before, but they're one that we hear about this quite regularly, the importance of these things, as well as those that on the recruitment side. Whether they're international companies or U.S. companies, this is something that they look at. So, Councilor Anderson, you raised this earlier. This is certainly something we think about more holistically. So why? Why business incentives? Why do they matter? As you know, personal income tax and property tax help fund state and municipal services. More jobs and private investment mean more funding for these important services. In Oregon, we don't have a lot of incentives compared to states in the South and the Southwest, but we do try to use those strategically. We're going to talk about them in a minute. These dollars, although small, are another way we can show that city and SEDCOR are committed to these companies, to keeping them here and to attracting new ones. This is true, and I'll give you an example. The NORPAC expansion, NORPAC Henningsen project that occurred near 25th and Madrona, adjacent to the Salem Airport. We heard from NORPAC very loud and clear that without the improvements there, they wouldn't make that investment, and without that, we wouldn't have had the partnership with Henningsen and the investment in the cold storage there. So though there it wasn't a direct grant to the company, it was infrastructure, and it wasn't just the infrastructure, it was the timing. How soon could we deliver that? Could we deliver that to meet their goal of opening their door? And you know, in this case, it was expediting that project to make that happen. So this is just an example of some of the incentives. You're likely familiar with many of these. Although the dollars are relatively small, we do have a variety of programs. Enterprise Zone is the one that you probably hear about the most. In addition to that, we partner with Marion County. Marion County has a grant program for economic development activity. Our federal programs division here at the city, we have federal money that comes to the region, and those dollars are targeted. The top priority for those dollars right now is economic development. Although the companies need to be income eligible, that's another resource. And then SDCs is mentioned here. Yes.
So I had my question real quick is this is talking about Salem, hence we're Salem Council, but SEDCOR is regional. It goes, what, to Woodburn, to Nahama, to anyway. Point is, do other cities have these same resources at hand to use the state programs for sure?
Right.
What about some of the other things the city of Salem is doing? Do these other communities have access to that?
Things that are unique to Salem?
tools that Salem has developed,
Yes.
so it's all available to the...
Well, I think the ones that are unique to Salem that are new, if that's your question, that the key piece, I was just starting to talk about system development charges. So at Mill Creek, we have, instead of a SDC, companies pay what's called a development district fee. That acts like an SDC. Recently, council approved of modifying that fee, lowering that fee, because we realized in working with Henningsen that that fee had grown. It was always intended to be in line with the SDC in Salem, but we learned was over time it had grown, so that was out of scale, and that was a disincentive for them. They were running all their performas based on an SDC and what they had paid at their other facility in Salem. So that was, the DDF is certainly unique, and our fees, whether they're SDC or DDF, are significantly lower than other communities, particularly in the Portland region. And we have a marketing piece that we're just working on now that articulates that compares us to all those communities. The other thing that's unique, I believe, to Salem is that we allow a phased payment of the DDF, particularly at Mill Creek. So we've heard from companies that say, that fee is due at the time the building permit is issued. There's no cash flow. I mean, they've just spent all the money. There's no income generated yet from the project.
And I think
so
just
phasing that is something that we...
That phasing particularly has been huge, and I think this group, the last time we met, we spoke with Don Schaldau, who came, Don Schaldau, was a site selector who works in siting large corporate clients, and one of the things that he raised as a potential issue was the system development charge, because they're always going to be significant, and they're not financeable in terms of, and they're upfront when the middle of a company's large expenditure, and they're one more hit that you can't use financing. So the city council looked at that. I think Casey Duncan, who at that point was in Steve's position, brought that back. You guys looked and proposed a 4-year phasing of those SDCs, and that's been something that's been very advantageous. In fact, came up with a conversation with a client looking at building, 100,000 square foot building out at Mill Creek as well. So that is very specific to Salem. And I think a lot of those, your other question, the way Salem's used their urban renewal, some of those financing programs, the SDC, even the Marion County job creation is focused on Marion County piece as well. So a lot of those tools are Salem specific. If someone's going to ask me what the biggest tool is the fact that right now is the available industrial land here in Salem. For context, the last numbers I heard, which was now probably 60 days old, but in Portland Metro, about 3% vacancy in their industrial ground. That is, anything below 10 is a seller's market. So having some place to go in a site is, in terms of particularly on the recruitment side, having someplace to go is about the biggest incentive I think you can ask.
Well, I was asking my question just to see how we compare. One, two, I know that we're regional. The Salem economy is Dallas. Does Dallas have the same tools that Kaiser has? That the other smaller communities than Salem, obviously, but they don't necessarily have full functioning economic development divisions within their city. So
Right.
they probably go to the League of Cities, would be my guess.
Right, and that's something we have materials that compares us to other communities, so if that's something you have interest in, happy to provide that. Just in the interest of time, maybe I'd say maybe we should just keep questions till the end for the remainder. We love the conversation, just want to make sure we get through. The only other thing I would add, I mentioned early on that not all these incentives are about money. Another kind of just quick anecdotal example of how we work together is we learned last week from a small company out in the Fairview Industrial Park area that they were having issue with their internet provider and had learned that there was a $20,000 fee required to have the service they needed to grow their business. We reached out to our provider, or contacted this provider network, and set up a meeting, and within a week we learned that company is the provider is agreeing to waive that fee, and because of other businesses that we told them in the area might benefit from that. So there's other ways beyond the funding that we work together.
So we touched on briefly in terms of what does this mean in terms of 2016. We've talked about last year, we saw about a little bit over $60 million in capital investment in our region, as you point out. About 40 million of that was here in the Salem market itself. I think when you look at why do you invest, we talked about jobs, community, and that capital investment, a pretty significant portion of that will come back in terms of tax revenue in the future too. So I think this really is seeing that build and us creating the momentum that's going to carry us into the future. This was the highest year of the last 4 years as well. And we're continuing to see the growth of those, and we expect this next year to be pretty significant as well based on what we've already seen. And that's my slide advance. We talked quite a little about Mill Creek Corporate Center, and I think folks are probably familiar with this. Just a quick, from the north to the south, the Home Depot is in. We've got FedEx's
Site A. Yeah.
Okay, so then site, yeah. And then we've got FedEx, who's there and existing. Site B, you'll see, is within days of closing. And they're looking at putting up new spec development there. We've talked already about the Henningsen project, which you said is in first phase, and we've got another client who's going through the process right now of taking the 17 acres, which are to the north of Henningsen. So again, seeing significant traction, interest, and projects going forward there as well. Just a few examples, some of the folks that we've talked to and some of the companies we've referenced today and the projects that we've seen in the last couple of years. So next up is this.
Sure. We're going to continue to focus on retention, as well as working with those companies and those parcels that Chad mentioned at Mill Creek Corporate Center. There's a lot of work that goes on before real estate agreements are signed, helping them get costs, helping them work through, with our Community Development and Public Works Department, what the fee structure and the permitting schedules look like. So a lot of that work will continue. And certainly continuing to track Henningsen and Pac Trust. We're really excited because we don't have a lot of buildings, and every time we get requests for buildings, we don't have buildings. Now to have two major size buildings, 100,000 square feet is the first phase out at Mill Creek, and we already know of companies certainly that have interest in that. And we mentioned early on and pointed out the flyer for the Startup Salem. We're going to continue to work together on some opportunities to reach out to our startup community. We've talked, and Chad has, about a roundtable of sorts, maybe for CEOs and owners of small business, small companies. CTEC, the Career and Technical Education Center, and continuing to work on workforce attraction. And then continuing to look at the Salem Airport. About a small portion of the Salem Airport, the southeastern portion of the Salem Airport, is within our Fairview industrial area. And that's an area that we're no longer collecting tax increment, but we have about $1.8 million left in that area. We also have some funding for additional grants in Fairview, but we're looking at how to spend that money strategically to support hangars and as well as new building development at the airport. So, and meeting to talk about target companies and that work. So, and although the election just occurred, we are going to be talking more about Measure 99 particularly, but that's not something we're wanting to focus on tonight. It's just something on our radar as we move forward. So I think with that, we'd like to open it up for questions and discussion. Yeah.
One of the things that seems to be going on that's really troubling is kind of the regional impact of problems up at Terminal 6. Kind of how are we involved in that? You kind of hear that there may be some impacts here locally as a result of those issues. And I guess I'd really like to understand what our role is in that, or do we just call Wyatt up and say we have a problem here? How do we do that?
Yeah, I'd open up to any board members from my side, or if everybody else has any great ideas. But yeah, give Bill a call him early, call him often, I've got to sell. Terminal 6, it's interesting, a great time. I was speaking to the port on Friday about this. In fact, they're going to, hoping that they could come have a conversation with us next month, but I think it's going to be in March, that they're going to talk and we're going to ask that exact question. The short answer, I don't think we'll have carrier, transload facility service at the port for at least 2 years. Some of that, I think the biggest implication for why that is really the state of the global cargo. I think folks have probably understood, but really there's an oversupply of ships, frankly. And you saw the Hanjin, who was the 75%, I believe, of the ships, of the container traffic through the port of Portland, went bankrupt. First they left, and then they went completely bankrupt. There are multiple. They're still the 5th largest container ship provider out there. So there's rumors that there's multiple others, potentially even larger companies facing those same impacts. The good news from the port perspective is the infrastructure. The airport's still there. They're adding air cargo. So I think for many of our goods, we're not going to be dramatically impacted, with the huge exception of agriculture. Ag, and I think our ag producers are the ones, and we're working with them.
Which is our big one.
Which is our big one, right? Yeah. But when you think of, I think of when I say, Garmin, or you got Olvin Manufacturing or West Salem Machine, they're not necessarily using that. But when you're talking, ag, hay, berries, they're being dramatically impacted by that. And so trying to find out that solution. I know we're working with, the governor's office. There's a transportation study right now to look at new intermodal facilities that we're part of and trying to queue up, and then ongoing conversations with the port as well.
The other, I guess, associated with that was, I thought I understood at one point recently in a conversation that the port was also looking at industrializing some of its land, which would seem like a really competitive problem for us at a future date. Is anything going on with that?
Yeah, and Teresa, you might ask you to add on to my answer here, but the port has been doing it, and they purchased Gresham Vista, which is approximately, I want to say, 120-acre industrial site outside of, how much?
Closer to 400.
Closer to 400. They did have a large facility, about 100-acre, that was available. Then they're developing another site. We see them oftentimes in projects, but they're very, I'd say, complementary from the standpoint that I would rather have a client who's, if you put yourself in a client's shoes and you're saying, hey, am I going to go to Oregon and look at just one site? I don't know. That's a lot. If I'm going to go and look at 2 or 3, and then see which one works and how are they different, most noticeable being, price point, we're half. And so in terms of a lot of what that property is. So we're cost competitive.
And we're nicer people.
And
do they look at,
Teresa,
would we be able to do associated, supply chain industries to some of theirs if they get larger industries? I mean, I just wondered if we're kind of thinking of where they're headed.
Some of that actually happens, and just the Intel halo. There's a lot of manufacturing in plastics and metals that, and even closer down here, when you think of, Boeing has a facility that's very large out in Gresham, and in Marion County we have quite a few suppliers that actually provide parts and pieces to precision cast parts in Boeing and such. So there is that, but to the industrial properties, they're in the state of Oregon. Along the I-5 corridor, Salem is really the valley, but Salem in particular is really at a sweet spot right now, because there are not large lots, and what we would call large lot is something larger than 50 acres, right? Mm-hmm. But in particular, if you want maybe more like close to 100, they aren't available. And Mill Creek is sort of the last of the spots. And that's hugely valuable to us. Manufacturing, your question earlier, is definitely the strength of Oregon is in its manufacturing companies. Our challenge here locally is that so much of our land is taken, and we might build an industrial park, but then Fairview's filled up with no offense, county, state, public entities, right? And that takes that space off the market for the manufacturer. So I think, though, that's going to become more competitive.
Thank you.
Yeah, great question. Thanks.
Other questions?
Thank you. I have a question and then a comment or two. I'm looking at the 2016 results with the 397 new and retained jobs. Can you break that down between what were new jobs and what were jobs retained? And then what's your definition of a retained job? Stopping somebody from some business from moving?
You're looking at the annual, SEDCOR's annual plan?
Yeah.
Look at SEDCOR's, and I
Yeah.
don't have the breakdown. I can get that back to you. Don't have that off the top of my head. But in terms of the actual numbers, but the retain, it absolutely is. Periodically you get the "we're going to move if this doesn't happen" kind of conversation. Oftentimes it's the "we need to add this to keep ourselves in business" job. But there is we do a litmus test around. At some point, I think Councilor McCoy had mentioned this at some point in the past as well. You can get pretty. We need to hear somebody say these jobs would go away if it doesn't for us to count it as retained. Sure. We don't just say, oh, we've worked with you, we're going to retain that job.
And I presume part of the retained jobs are a company that has 40 employees says we want to go to 60 once. Now, is that counted as retained or is that counted as new?
We would count those as the 20 new.
Okay.
Would not go back there. And the example being, we've got 40 jobs. These are all at risk if we don't add this new business line.
Sure.
Then we're going to do 20 new and 40 retained.
40 retained, sure.
Yep.
You should count it both ways. That's what I do with Daryl, wouldn't you? Wouldn't you look at it that way?
He's blessed it.
Yeah.
You're an attorney.
Yeah. One comment is that we had this discussion when we met a year and a half ago, I think, over in the Anderson room, and I was actually quite pleasantly surprised that the 85-15 breakdown of where you spend your energy, because I will admit that I could have assumed, I would not have been surprised had it been 15-85. So I think that's terrific that we're spending 85% of our time and effort on companies that are already here, that already want to be here, and especially in light of that little YouTube thing that I'm pretty sure we saw last year, that it's a 1 in 10 chance of, and I'm sure the chances are better for us because it's Salem and the other things we've talked about, but that's still long odds to be chasing. And so I think emphasis on what we've got here and how we can build that up is terrific, and I commend you for that.
Well, thanks, and I think it's even more straightforward for us than that, is that if you've got a good relationship with business, it's easier to make a case that we take care of take care of your existing clients. You can look at new clients in the face and say, this is what we're going to do. And you also understand their problems versus if you're always out hunting new.
Yes, Teresa?
It's not really a question, but I think what's really important for all of us in this room to think about as we move forward into the next year is, as these projects come along, and they are coming, and they're coming more quickly, they have short time frames. And I know we feel this as a utility, just like the city does and SEDCOR, but it is really tough to get everything in and done on the schedule that the business comes with. And, when it used to be, you'd think, oh, if we're going to build a new building, we might, 100,000 square foot building that's 18 months, from kind of the very start to the very end, you had that frame of time. It is not that. And I don't know what the average would be now, but I'd say it's probably 6 to 9 months that they want to get something up and done. And that's going to really pressure all of us in figuring out, how do you do that? Where do we fit it in? It's not, there's a lot of property, but then there's always roads and infrastructure issues that go with that, and challenges, especially if you're redeveloping property. If you look at the McGilchrist area, which I think will start to pop more here too. So just pay attention and help support us, and we'll try to help support you all as well on timing.
Yes, Councilor I'm sorry. I was going to call on Councilor McCoy.
I raised my hand. You can get away with that next month, but not right now.
Keep your hand up forever, McCoy.
This is a season, I was thinking we were talking about that list of incentives and the one that we sort of worked up because it was a local issue. Are there other things on a wish list for incentives that you've thought about or have popped up or you're considering that we might bring to us to think about?
You know what, I would say the key one right now, and I think about, to do that, what is business's number one problem? And I would say the number one long-term problem we have is for most companies and across the U.S. is workforce. If there's a way to directly incent, support, if you move here, we will help you train your first 100 employees. If you're here and you're going to hire, we will help deliver these skills. Anything tied to that is going to be, I'm going to make that even maybe a little bit stronger. The city and country and region that solves the workforce problem in terms of how to put the right employee at the right place at the right time is going to win.
Okay. Following up then, my other question here was the CTEC question, which sort of is in that wheelhouse to a degree. You mentioned you were going to support that, or you were supporting that. How are you supporting that? In what ways? A, and B, is that, to your point that you just made, is there a way to work with them to leverage, identify those areas in the, that maybe they can add for training classes moving forward?
Absolutely. So CTEC, some of that work has started with actually from Nick Harville from my office, as well as some conversations out of the SEDCOR Construction Alliance. There's no allowance there. Had got that ball rolling and started raising that issue and in conversations with Chuck Lee and as well as with Mountain West. Really got that ball rolling in terms of connecting companies to the training and to the raw material that is these great new students. I personally am on the advisory board. We've got members as well, I think, on my board as well, who work and support that, if not on our executive council, on our board. And then we're working to help connect companies so that there are mentorship opportunities, there's opportunities for sponsorships, those types of opportunities. This is an absolute first step into solving that problem. And I think all it takes, if you haven't done a tour, I think everybody here probably has. I encourage you to. A great program, and you can just see the difference. We toured with Senator Wyden last week before, and every time you go through there, it's amazing to see just the kids who are engaged, confident, and looking at new things. They're doing a great thing over there.
And I think
I agree with that. I got to tour that, and the thing that really resonated with me were some of the students that were, the time I went, the students were sort of leading the little, in the welding group. It was the students talking to me about what they were doing. And in that group specifically, and I know there's always a dearth of welders, is that I didn't like school. I was about ready to drop out. This has got me staying in school to get my diploma. But B, I love this. I'm going to do this the rest of my life. I found out what I can do and make money and make a good family wage job doing this. And it was not one kid, it was 5 or 6 of them said that to me.
Yep.
And that's powerful stuff when you can do that, and you've reached kids that probably were not on a track to go to a university and look at one of those kind of jobs.
Yeah,
so,
and we're seeing that
great.
investment start more even within our region as well. So.
I think the only thing I'd add to that is that we're also working with them as it relates to target industries and having some early conversations about the Salem Airport and aviation mechanics and other potential industries that might make sense to partner on.
And I think that's really important because, I was sort of involved in there early on when I was still working, and I know they were struggling a little bit. They didn't know which way to go, and some of the areas they were looking at, to me, where maybe, they were the secondary jobs for sure. And I think in this case, what you're talking about is a great thing, and I think that's what they're really looking for anyway. They would much rather see that with a career and a little higher salary jobs than some of the things they were looking at.
I think Brent Hart has a question.
Thank you. Actually, in response to your question, Councilor McCoy, I'm going to jump on what Chad was saying on the wish list. I would include infrastructure, things that prioritizing Mid-Gilchrist shows not only provides the opportunity by having the infrastructure there, but it shows a commitment to anybody who would come and invest there, that you're serious about upgrading this area and the transportation options and the circulation and all that. And I would add the airport runway extension would be high on the wish list because it's going to create more capacity for different types of aircraft. And frankly, I don't see a lot of growth potential in the commercial activity at the airport until we get it. It's a whole nother conversation for another night on airport public policy, but and other things having to do that intersect with the jobs that you do is urban renewal and the money that Annie mentioned that's in Fairview. There's a railroad spur in that area, and do we accentuate and help railroad spur access either there or in the gateway area with urban renewal money? All of those things allow SEDCOR to maximize your investment in us by helping us do our job better. And if I could, before we're done, if Chad has any numbers having to do with the tax revenue that comes into the general fund when something comes off of the economic roles like Home Depot.
Yeah, I think one of the things we've talked about, it's always interesting, is trying to think, what is the value for SEDCOR in terms of if I'm an investor, if I'm looking at community, and you just look at one or two projects in reference to Home Depot, and you look at the tax revenue generated off that will roughly pay for the city's contribution to SEDCOR 2 times. That is, it's roughly 2 times in 1 year our contribution. I think that is how we need to continue to help companies do that, not because this is all about growing a tax base. It's about building a community, but you also, to do that, cost money to build infrastructure, to build out that next level, and that this is what, essentially part of our jobs is continue to help fund, to help make your jobs more fun, as we're bringing in more revenue as well.
Councilor Bennett, did you have a question?
I just wanted to follow up on Teresa's comment. I thought that was very helpful to understand what the timelines now look like, that we've seen them contract that much. And I'm hoping that SEDCOR stays in touch with us on whether or not we're meeting those kinds of timelines, because it's, we've been through the recession and did the layoffs, and now it's an add back time, and making sure we're meeting those kind of goals, I think, is very difficult. I know I've been contacted just on small projects where permitting has gone a little slower, and I think the manager, I think, Steve, as you put together your budget, need to really pay, I hope, close attention to that problem of meeting this really aggressive timelines. It's one that we went through before the recession. We were really working on it, and I think keeping up with that is really important.
Councilor McCoy, did you have a question?
That was part of it. The mayor-elect and his wisdom is one step ahead of me. I want to get recognized at one point next year.
That's known as a brownie point. Did you have something else?
Yeah, infrastructure. The infrastructure, don't assume, my question would be, there is an an ongoing dialogue between the city and SEDCOR on
daily
what the infrastructure needs are, and do we have a list of them, and are they prioritized, and all that kind of stuff. And price tag and some plan to get at them.
Yeah, particularly, McGilchrist has been risen many times. If it's a project of that scale, we would have someone from SEDCOR on an advisory committee for the project and weighing in at, it's possibly when we do outreach and we're out meeting with businesses. So there's that level, and then there's just, and then annually, we sit down, as we just did, every July, August, and highlight what our priorities are for the year, what our work plan is, what SEDCOR's work plan is, and lay that out. And Chad and I are in touch daily, but particularly on the infrastructure, I think that's, between the two of us, we're hitting those ODOT committees, the governor's office, also tracking what the state and regional priorities and funding are as well.
And in terms of deal timeline, one of the metrics in terms of actual deliverables that having gone through that, I think it was about April 15th of I guess it's this year, April 15th of 2016, Paul Henningsen called us and said we need a new building. They'd done some initial groundwork, but they'd had to walk away from the table for business reasons. They came back in April. The deal was essentially done and broke ground, I believe, July 7th, and they expect to have that building up and built by May. And so by the time you think, the city, the cross between urban renewal, between the plan review, the surveyor, to put it all together, to have the transaction done, to get their due diligence done, to make sure that they knew, just a year till it opens is an amazing time frame for a $30 million building. I think we're getting better, and there's still room for improvement, but the ongoing, in terms of answering at the speed of business, I absolutely feel very firm we can do that.
You see, we're getting better, SEDCOR's getting better, the city's getting better. Or the
We as a team, thank you. We absolutely. No, this is absolutely a team. We couldn't deliver that.
And also for Mill Creek, we have a team member who's not here this evening, which is who is vital, and it's the state. So that's that adds a dynamic that can be challenging.
Well, I'd like to say a couple words about timing and then about return on investment. But as far as timing, I think it's good for all of us to sit here and learn that time frames are shortening, and we're all saying we're all trying hard and we're trying to do a better job and to be ready. But I think it would be really interesting to be able to sort of map and timeline what it is it takes to get a building up, like maybe even just to go back and look at a couple and use them as a baseline and say, okay, this is what happened when we got NORPAC up and running, and then this was what it took to get Henningsen, the new Henningsen, up and running, and then look at that and see where can things be shortened possibly. Where were the snags? And we all know we've got some snags along the way. And be able to look at that and then over time say, yeah, we're doing better because we're shortening these time frames. But I'm wondering who's the whip? Because we have responsibility. SEDCOR may have a responsibility in some of it. Certainly the state of Oregon with those contracts has a responsibility. Within our own department, PGE probably has, you got to get those lines in and all that. And I'm wondering, on these projects, really, who ends up being the whip? And maybe it's something for you all to think about, maybe creating a whip position, so to speak, when you have a big project. I know that you do teams. I think we do teams here for that.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think we've scheduled a debrief on Henningsen. So what we typically do is, our former city manager used to refer to this as an A-team meeting, right. But a team with the utility reps, SEDCOR, all the city folks at the table, the project coordinator, which has been very helpful. That now that service is free of cost for these projects that are of this size, and they're the point of contact, taking folks through the permitting process, and they're the one of the key liaisons assisting with permitting and city process. But bringing those teams together at the start of a project, we have a schedule, we know who's on point and what those timelines are, and then at the end, and I feel like SEDCOR, Chad chime in, but I think SEDCOR serves in many respects as that whip, calling on folks and keeping tabs of things along the way. Certainly we're at the table as well, and then at the end doing a debrief, and we've scheduled that one for Henningsen, just as you're saying, to kind of review and see what we've learned and where we can do better. So.
Right, and then there are those that you don't have any control over, like the Attorney General's office and the contracting, et cetera. But I think we've got to figure out some way that we do have some control over it, and maybe there's some carrot that goes with the stick. And I know our city manager and staff have worked hard. I know Christian Rutherford has with DAS to help with this, and also trying to work with the Attorney General's office. But if we truly want to be competitive with other regions and other states, we better be able to say, this is how we do it faster, this is how we do it better, rather than just generalities, to really point to some projects and say, we did this one in so many months or whatever. Just a thought.
Great point, and we'll continue to improve on that. The fun thing, I think, the compliment is some of the things Henningsen said. They have been amazed at the speed already.
If I may, Chad, I was talking with one of the Henningsen family members, and I think what you're suggesting, Mayor, is something we do need to do so we can replicate it. The gentleman from Henningsen said his company's experience in Salem was the second best of their, I don't know how many locations they have. The best was a city in Oklahoma in which he received his building permit and certificate of occupancy at the same meeting. I would suggest that's probably a little too expeditious for the business, but certainly we can continue to.
And I heard that comment. He was very complimentary of Salem.
Rich, does that work for you?
Yeah, no, but he really was complimentary of Salem, and absolutely, I hear that all the time on these big projects. I hear again and again how pleased they are with the way our public works with urban development and all the way down the line. So it's really makes
and
a
even
huge
a
difference.
nice part of that as well, and what doesn't get enough is the private sector response to that, whether it's the utilities, whether it's K&E who's doing the rock out there, the private sector has really pushed that, or I know Rich runs into a lot of that with his construction as well. So it really is a team, I think, going back to that earlier piece.
I think that's great. Councillor Bednars.
So I got a tenant out on the Fairview. I'm looking at Annie at this point. I have a tenant out at Fairview, and they did a major expansion. It's a traded sector call center, medical call center. My point was they were not aware of any of the programs that were out there, and I made that made you aware of that at the time, that we didn't know there was available funds, and Chad wasn't involved, or SEDCOR wasn't involved in it, so they wouldn't have known to express those things.
Right.
Is there a process now in place within the city that says, if I'm going to expand, gee, if I don't go to SEDCOR and find out, the city at least is going to tell me this is available?
Yep, I think there's two ways. One, we've added half FTE, one project coordinator within our department, within urban development, Mark Metzger, who is funded, half of his time is focused on business retention and particularly on the small folks like you're talking about. So going out and meeting, he just sent 60 letters to property owners in Fairview. And that's intended, we're meeting quite often. He's setting up those meetings, and then we're going out with someone from SEDCOR, going out together. But that's another kind of an added strengthening our business retention, particularly on the small folks. The other way is that we get notified now of any pre-application conferences. So if there's any activity whatsoever that requires site plan review or permit, or where there's enough going on where there's a pre-application conference, then we get an email and we attend those meetings.
In this case, they added 75 employees.
Yes. So with either of those, we would have known.
Would have known at that point.
With those two processes.
If I don't receive that letter, and you said it just went out, and truly, if I don't receive it, I'll come back to you and say I didn't receive it, because I want to make sure that I'm getting, and the rest of that means somebody else might not be getting theirs as well. So thanks, Annie.
Great. I'd like to recognize.
Let your counselor know for that area.
I'd like to recognize our Marion County Commissioner, Kevin Cameron. Welcome. We're glad you're able to be with us tonight.
Sorry I'm late. I was at a
It's all right.
road meeting with ODOT up in Aurora.
Well, that's pretty important too. So we understand that. We're just pleased that you're here and here off the road safe and sound. That's good. It's a good thing. All right. I want to be mindful of time, and I haven't probably been a very good timekeeper. But I want to know if there's just something closing that you want to say, and then we'll move to our downtown urban development report.
I think the only thing from SEDCOR I might add was thank you. For the ongoing participation, support, drive, both from you, Madam Mayor, as well as from your team all the way through. Just thanks. It's been a great year, and look forward to doing some more as well.
The only thing I'd say in closing is just that we're adding some new tools to the city's website. As you all know, we're working on our website retool, but in the interim, we've added a variety of things to the economic development page. The materials you see tonight, as well as things like this that are trying to simplify the incentives we have, as well as a piece we just put together that's trying to simplify for folks what our permitting process is and who the contacts are. So there's a variety of things you'll see added there. So thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you all for coming. We really do appreciate this more intimate time with you. Sometimes in council meetings, you'll be there in the audience, but we don't get a chance to really visit. So thank you. Thank you so much. All right. I understand. I think we should. Are going to present, so we'll get ourselves put together here.
I'll be handling the presentation, and Cherie will be here to assist with any questions we might have. Yeah.
Perfect.
Any questions you can't answer?
Anything I can answer, yes. Or if I can't make up an answer to. All right, are we ready?
Yes.
Okay. So, good evening. I'm Kristen Rutherford. I'm the city's Urban Development Director. And before I start talking about focus groups, I want to comment just very briefly about the previous session with SEDCOR and just share that in the nearly a year that I've been here, I have been very, very impressed at the degree of collaboration and coordination and interaction that occurs between the city and SEDCOR when it comes to economic development. You know, I came here from the Portland metro area where we had a regional model there as well, and the number of contacts, the amount of communication, and the degree of working together was not nearly as closely coordinated there as it was here. So it's been very nice to come into a team that has that kind of relationship. So I just wanted to share that as a point of comparison, you know, for what I've seen elsewhere. But what I'm here to actually talk about tonight is our downtown focus groups. So when I came into this position 11 or so months ago, one of the top priorities that was shared with me by a number of council members and by people in the community is the vibrancy and economic health of the downtown here in Salem. In 2011, the city adopted a downtown action plan for the Riverfront Downtown Urban Renewal Area that identified projects and priorities. But then a number of those projects were shelved. We had invested in developing the convention center and really tied up a lot of our financial resources in that project. In 2018, that convention center debt is going to be paid off. And that's going to free up about $30 million of additional bonding capacity so that we can start implementing those projects, those priorities that were identified back in the 2011 action plan. However, that action plan was developed during the Great Recession. A lot of years have passed by since then. The economic climate has changed. And before we just kind of jump back in that action plan and start scheduling projects, it seemed timely to revisit those projects and make sure that they still made sense, make sure that the priorities were still the same, that make sure that we weren't overlooking projects that weren't considered several years ago. So to that end, we convened a series of focus groups to provide input on all of those projects and to help us with our future planning. So tonight I'm going to cover the information that was considered in these focus groups, talk about the input that we received, and then update you on recent downtown activity and our next steps. From July through September, we held 12 different focus group meetings attended by 69 people. We invited people from a really, really broad and diverse spectrum of interests in the downtown group to seek their input and their comment and their priorities. These included representatives from property owners, downtown residents. We had major stakeholders like Willamette University, other large entities. We had a group that was made up of folks from the artists, events, tourism sector. We had retail, commercial representatives in a group, restaurants, anchor tenants, you know, like Nordstrom's, Kohl's, those sorts of businesses. Service providers are, you know, accountants and lawyers that are downtown and architects, and then also a group of university students. So we began those meetings in July through September, and then in September we also had a couple of different ad hoc meetings to catch those that weren't able to make it to the regularly scheduled meetings during the summer. So I have to say that this is one of the more fun and interesting projects that I've been involved in during my career, because these, each of these meetings kind of had its own flavor, depending on the makeup of attendees. But the conversations that they had, I think, were more candid and more rich than I found in a lot of different groups that I've participated in. So I personally really enjoyed being a part of these and hearing the discussion. We started each meeting, you see the big map on the table there. So we started with laying out this big map that showed the different investment areas that were identified in the action plan. So the action plan focused on investments in the historic core, in Riverfront Park, in Midtown, the North Waterfront, and the North Downtown areas. And then within those different geographic subsets of the urban renewal area, the action plan then focused on different kinds of projects and priorities within each of those sectors. So we started out with each of these impact areas and gave them an opportunity to look at the areas and identify where they thought urban renewal investment was most needed, as well as the type of investment that was needed. Then the next step in the meeting structure was we gave them a list of all of the projects that were identified in the action plan and an opportunity to prioritize those projects. We gave them an opportunity to throw out on the table any new projects that they thought that the agency should consider that wasn't considered back in the development of the action plan. And then we concluded each meeting with an opportunity for these people to have kind of a free-form conversation about their concerns, about their interests tied to the downtown area. And I think that was one of the more interesting parts of this, because you know, we brought together a lot of different people that had a connection, either living or working in the downtown area, that didn't necessarily know each other. And so I think that's one thing that they really enjoyed, was kind of getting to know their neighbors and find out what other people were doing and what their concerns and interests were. So this is the information that came out of the big maps. So as people sat around the maps, they had 4 different colors of dots representing housing, streetscape, investment, or other. And with other, they could put a dot and write down whatever it is they wanted on the map. So they took these dots, and in discussion with each other, they talked about the downtown and where they saw needs. You know, they put the housing dots down where they thought there should be housing. They would put green dots all over the place where they thought there should be streetscape improvements. Investment was tied more to not specifically housing investment, but our tool and toolbox program, where we might be doing commercial retail, you know, financing for improvements, that sort of thing. And the nature of the other dots ranged from a downtown plaza to docks and some sort of like a kayak rental facility down at the river to a performing arts theater. So all sorts of different ideas kind of came up under that other category. So as you can see on the breakdown here, the highest priority or the most dots on this map fell under the housing category. I'm sorry, fell under the streetscape category, followed by the housing or by the other than the investment and then the housing. But they were really pretty evenly distributed. There wasn't one that really kind of swept the table in this exercise. So to look at it in a little bit more detail, we took those dots, and Cherie went through all the hard work of mapping them out here. So on streetscape, you can see they really covered the map with streetscape improvements. And in this exercise, streetscape was very broadly defined. For some people, their interest was bike ped improvements and more bike lanes. For others, it was, you know, connections down to the riverfront. For others, it was softening and adding more greenery and more street furniture and more trees and landscaping in the downtown area. For others, it was traffic calming and an interest in road diets or two-waying the streets. So people came at it, kind of each from their own interest. But across the board, streetscape was very important to the attendees and was top ranked in a number of the different focus group meetings. So each of these that you see listed here ranked streetscape as their greatest interest for investment. Housing also ranked highly. This represents all of the different dots where people thought we could try to fit in housing in the downtown area. This was the top ranked category for our residents and for the university students. So we met with university students in September after they returned to school, and that was a very interesting meeting. We found that most of the university students live all over the place in Salem and really nowhere near the university. And so for university students that don't have a car and that are dependent on public transportation, weekends are a challenge. Cycling from home to school can be a challenge. And so they particularly have a very strong desire for more housing closer into the center, so where it's an easier commute for them to school. They would love to see more options. Investment. So this didn't rank as number one in any of the groups, but was there as like the second or third priority in a number of groups. So here they've identified areas where they think that our toolbox programs, our grants and loans, could be of greater use, whether we more directly market them or make them more readily available to people to renovate facilities, to do second-story conversions to offices, or spruce up the exteriors of their buildings, things that they think would make a property more marketable or attract that additional investment. And then lastly was our other category. You'll see a big area there down at Riverfront Park. We had a lot of interest in some sort of commercial center where you could, buy a cup of coffee or rent a kayak or canoe, or where we would develop additional ramps so that people could interact better with the river. That was really popular in the other category. Some of the other spots that you see around here were tied to creating a theater district, creating some sort of civic plaza or gathering spots in the downtown area. Things like bike rental facilities and having those scattered throughout the downtown. That came up under this other category. The gathering space notion, whether it was for some sort of performance or just a place to hang out and interact, was very popular in this section of the exercise. So the other category also included recommendations that aren't necessarily related directly to urban renewal, but which are still seen as important for downtown vibrancy, like weekend transit service. So there's really nothing that urban renewal can do as it relates to weekend transit service, but it did come up in this other category as something that people thought is important for that vibrancy downtown. This category also included things that aren't really project specific, like reviewing our development codes or expanding the urban renewal area to take in property a little bit further in the North Waterfront area or on the east side towards the Capitol. And there are other things that it considered that were really kind of difficult for us to influence, like attracting a grocery store in the downtown. So there's a lot of discussion about things, a lot of discussion about how wonderful it would be to have a grocery store downtown, and what could urban renewal do perhaps to incentivize or find space or something like that, which, you know, is something that the tool could look at, but actually locating a grocery store here would be kind of beyond the scope of what we could implement. The other category also captured interest in enhancing our alleys. Additional investment in art, you know, and getting art on the art pedestals that are out there, and getting murals up, establishing a theater district that came up, and also developing a year-round market, and that's something that I will talk about a bit more towards the end of the presentation. So the next exercise in the sessions allowed our participants to look at specific projects identified in the action plan and prioritize them. So you'll see on the list here all of the projects that are called out within the action plan. So each participant was given 2 dots to vote for the projects that they thought were the most needed or would have the greatest impact on downtown vitality. Some of these projects in the action plan are definitely products of the time and the conditions or specific opportunities that were in play at the time the action plan was developed, like the Marion Parkade investment strategy, which was tied to a college that was interested in investing and having a facility located kind of on and in that parkade. So this exercise allowed us to get input on whether or not all of these projects still hold the same sense of importance that they did back, you know, in 2010, 2011. I want to take a second here to answer any questions that any of you might have about any of the projects or on the list, or if you're all familiar with them, then I'll move on. Okay. So the results of this exercise were interesting because we had a 3-way tie in priorities, with 3 of them each garnering 17% of the dots. Our property acquisition and opportunity, the streetscape improvements, and the housing opportunity fund all came out equal in terms of priority and interest. So to distinguish between property acquisition and the housing opportunity fund, the property acquisition project focuses more on assembling parcels for redevelopment, while the housing opportunity fund is tied more specifically to financial tools to assist with housing. So the grant that was awarded here recently for the development on Court and Front Street, that would fall more under the Housing Opportunity Fund, whereas the work that we went through this spring and summer meeting with property owners about an acquisition and assembling parcels would fall under that first category there. The Toolbox program also received a lot of interest. People saw a lot of value in the work that's done with that Toolbox program and the grants and loans. And there was also significant support, again, as we saw elsewhere, for some sort of commercial facility down at Riverfront Park. The categories that were low, I think, in large part scored lowly because they were a reflection of kind of bygone times. The Downtown Transportation Fund, that project is to implement the circulation and mobility study that was adopted a few years ago. And I think the reason that that scored lower than we might think it would is because of the interest in streetscape improvements. And I think a lot of people kind of saw the kinds of projects that they're interested in, the bike peds projects, falling more under streetscape improvements than the Downtown Transportation Fund.
Did they then, do you think they recognized, because this was done before High and Church, would they have recognized that as streetscape then, do you think?
I think, yeah, I think they saw that more as a streetscape, as a bike ped improvement. I think those lines were really blurred for a lot of them. That, by the time we met with the student group, that project had been built. The students loved that project. We have just wonderful feedback from the student group about that. But I think they tended to think that as, you know, bike ped is a little bit different from other transportation projects in their minds.
I think the question will become, when are you satisfying the streetscape improvement? What's it look like?
Yes, yeah. Yeah, and that was kind of one of the trickier aspects of doing this with streetscape, because it means different things to different people. You know, yeah, like I said, for some of them, streetscape was all about greenery. You know, for others, it was all about bike ped connectivity or slower traffic. Yeah. The downtown shuttle was another interesting project. Didn't receive a lot of votes, but that was because everybody understood that we can't use urban renewal to operate a shuttle. So while there was, I think, in every group, interest in a shuttle, and everybody thought that there would be a benefit to the downtown in having some sort of shuttle or circulator, they didn't prioritize it highly because of that operational issue. And then the final three, the Marion Square Park improvements, the Parkade investment strategy, and the demonstration grant, I think were more specific to 10 years ago, and people didn't see as much merit in those projects today as maybe they had in the past. After prioritizing the projects, we moved on to looking at the challenges that were included in the action plan. So the action plan also specifically identified seven or so different challenges that existed back in the 2010-2011 timeframe. So we ran those by everybody to see if these are still challenges, or if things have improved or worsened or don't matter anymore. So city codes came up first, and by city codes here, they meant more specifically building and safety codes. The challenges with taking a historic building and getting a sprinkler system in and getting elevators in and the proper access, you know, to better utilize the upper floors. So the time that it takes, the cost that's incurred to make that pencil. So, you know, I think people understood that building and safety codes are needed for safety, and that there's really not a lot that you can do about that, but acknowledging it is a challenge, and it does make some of these investments financially prohibitive. So, you know, and so if you identify that, you link that back to the toolbox or some of the other financial programs they offer, I think that's where they saw the connection is, we have a challenge here, but we can mitigate it with these kinds of investments. Here, streetscape and bike pedestrian connectivity was identified as a challenge. Some of the specific areas that were talked about were connections into Riverfront Park. The notion of either an overcrossing or undercrossing came up in a number of the groups. I think everybody also acknowledging that it would be incredibly expensive and very difficult to accommodate within the footprint and make it safe and ADA compliant. But there was a very strong feeling that some sort of improved connection from downtown to the riverfront is important. And then the last major challenge that was identified is safety, crime, and homelessness. And this category was very, very interesting, because in our first few groups, this wasn't raised at all. And our first few groups occurred right around the time or shortly after the day room at the Mission was closed down. And then a little bit later in the summer, in addition to the day room being closed down, the lockers, storage lockers, were taken offline. And there was a very strong correlation between people in the focus groups beginning to comment about this as an issue, coinciding when those lockers were taken offline and more people were out on the streets during the day with all of their stuff, and homelessness became much, much more visible around that same time frame. So there were not, there was no really any anecdotal sharing of information about actual safety challenges, actual crimes, or people feeling threatened. It had more to do with the visual issues and litter, trash, panhandling, and just kind of visual mess in the downtown area. The other challenges that were included in the original action plan, things like renovation costs, rental rates, those were still important, but I think maybe less so than they were during the recession. And then economic conditions and competition scored quite low compared to everything else. So our final exercise for the group was a magic wand exercise. And in this one, we went around the room and they could each say one thing that they thought would make a real big difference in the downtown area. If we invested in this, the downtown would improve, in their mind. So housing was number one. A lot of people came up with, still that investing in housing. So we're seeing that housing is consistent in all of these different exercises. Waterfront restaurant and recreation continue to score high. So we're getting a lot of checks and balances and cross-referencing here that the people are being pretty consistent. Relocating the UGM was number 3 in this exercise. Improving street lighting, that came up a couple of times, that there are dark spots in the downtown area, and people feel that would help improve the vibrancy at night and people feeling safe and wanting to be down there at night if we had consistent lighting and some lighting infill. And then the two-way street grid, that came up during our street and streetscape discussions. Downtown Plaza, that was a pretty popular one that came up. A couple of groups brought up boutique hotels and the need for additional accommodations downtown. And then the last two, the pedestrian undercrossing and the Wells Fargo site development, were also brought up by more than one person as kind of a fix-it projects. So prior to kicking off the focus groups and throughout the series of meetings, we've had a lot of activity occurring in the downtown that kind of crosses over the priorities and the needs that were identified in the focus groups. In the spring, our department began outreach to a number of property owners that own properties identified by the Downtown Advisory Board as suitable sites for acquisition and redevelopment. And during those outreach meetings, we learned from each property owner that they either had a project in the works or had a planned project, maybe a couple years down the road. And so out of those discussions, we realized that our role for now really wasn't going to be as a purchaser, but would be more as a gap financer or funding partner in their redevelopment project. Well, since that initial outreach, the Wells Fargo site has been purchased. It was purchased by Pacific Office Automation, and they are going through all of the permitting processes right now so that they can begin their tenant improvements here very soon. They intend to be owner occupants of the former Newberry department store. They are going to renovate the second story and lease that out as office space. They have pulled the demolition permit for the Wells Fargo site. They have not really shared anything with regards to plans for that site at this time because their focus is right now is completely on doing the improvements that they need so they can move into their new facility. We are certainly taking every opportunity that we have to encourage them to redevelop the rest of the property with some housing included in that redevelopment. We have shared with them, the names of developers that might be interested partners, and have expressed with them that it's something that our advisory board has been interested to in terms of financially supporting housing in that location. We have also, as I mentioned earlier, funded the new mixed-use housing project on Court and Front Street that will be under construction next spring, bringing an additional 40 or so housing units to that location. And then this fall, we also started working with Marion County and Chariots to develop a public market on the north end of the transit center. So again, that was something that had come up with people in the focus groups, that interest in a sort of a gathering space and market. So our initial efforts there are to relocate the Wednesday market to that location this spring on a temporary basis without a permanent structure. We are meeting with the condo board in December to get their blessing on this and move forward. We're also working with Public Works to get a consultant on board to start developing concepts for a permanent structure that would house a permanent year-round market in that location. So once we kind of work through everything to get the market there on a temporary basis, then our next step will be to move on to working with the condo board with regards to the permanent structure, which we see as being an urban renewal funded project, but we would not be the operators. The operation would be.
It's the courthouse square is the condominium.
Yes, it's at that north end of the transit center. We are also working with Public Works and consultants on a traffic analysis for a two-way conversion of State Street up to Church Street within the urban renewal boundary. Further, if there's additional funding, non-urban renewal funding that's available. And we are also planning investments in additional art, working with others to make urban renewal purchases of art so we can get art on the empty pedestals downtown, and starting discussions about what we can do to get some additional murals in the alleys. So interestingly, a lot of the things that we've had underway are also things that have come up in a number of the different focus groups. So that's some nice validation and confirmation that the things we're doing are things that the community is interested in us doing. So our next steps then are we will be presenting the same information to the Downtown Advisory Board in December. We will continue to pursue all of the activities that I've just recapped that are underway, and we will be integrating the information and the priorities that have come out of the focus groups as we start developing the upcoming budget and working these projects into the CIP. So we're running right up on the end of our timeline here, and so we've got a few minutes where I can answer some questions for you.
We are going to take questions. I want to make one quick comment that how many people work in urban development?
So we have, well, urban development as a whole is 34 people, but that's the airport, it's parking enforcement. On this effort here,
well, how many people would you say work on downtown urban development? Working with property owners, working with toolbox loans, working with restaurants, working with
Cherie, with some assistance from Sarah Long, with some assistance from Renee Frazier, who handles our budget, and from Clint Dameron in real estate.
And some assistance from Kristen.
I think so. Well, you're doing a Herculean job for very few people. You've done some really heavy lifting. There have been a lot of projects that have come along. When I look at all of this and I listen to the lists, one of my comments about what people would like to see, I would like to start having some kind of interaction with downtown stakeholders and businesses, with them telling us what they are going to do. Mm-hmm. I have a feeling that there's a mentality that the city is going to come downtown and do it for you. And I've heard that for years. And I would like to hear people, when they're talking about they want streetscape and they want street lighting, there are so many of them that will not sweep their front way and they will not wash their windows. And as far as I'm concerned, that's number one. And I think that kind of doing away with that mentality of, I mean, it's wonderful to tell them what we can do, And I think that's important. But I think we need to start having a few requirements for the other way. I mean, I have walked downtown over and over and over, and trash isn't picked up in doorways, and they don't wash their windows, and they don't take care of anything. And then they wonder, why aren't we making their downtown environment perfect? So that's my first rant. And my second thing is, when I look at these different things and projects, and some of them, like, you know, rental bicycles and restaurants and things to rent at the waterfront, which I think are fabulous ideas. Those are private businesses will come along and do those things. But I think we have to look at, okay, how many people work in the urban development department? What's the biggest return on their time? You got 40 hours in a week per person, and you've got to figure out where the biggest return can be. And my guess is it's going to be on projects like the one you just opened up for us with the Pacific Office Automation, with the Gaylor apartment building. With some of those, you would have to rent an awful lot of bicycles downtown to have any kind of return on that investment. But if we can get bricks and mortar, we can improve the tax revenue from downtown. And that's what urban renewal is supposed to do. So with that, Councillor Bennett, and then Councillor Anderson, Councillor Bednarz, Councillor Benjamin, in that order. How's that?
Thank you, Mayor. Just a couple of things. I want to kind of second a couple of the things the mayor said. I think that with the Main Street project, I think we're headed in the right direction in terms of people sweeping their sidewalks, washing their windows, and taking a different kind of attitude toward their role in downtown and the maintenance of their space. Along with, I'm looking forward to seeing how they will integrate themselves into this set of projects too, how that'll be presented to them as they get going. I know you're familiar with it. I want to also, a couple of these things I'm really excited about. Cherie and I spent quality time we'll never retrieve working on Plaza about, 7, 8 years ago. And the only place we could come up with was this north part of the Transit Mall that really had the space, but it was in such poor repair, and the county's corrected that, you couldn't put anything on the plaza itself. It would collapse on top of the cars underneath. Now that they've fixed that, I'm really glad to see this one moving forward. This is a real positive. Tremendous.
So I do feel the need to clarify that in all of our conversations with the county, they have been very clear that we need to work with them very closely on the structural elements.
Right. Yeah.
So whatever we do design there, there may be some limits in what we can do because of weight.
Well, the previous because of weight was don't walk on it if you're smart. The other, I want to tell you, this streetscape, as you have described this broad description, I think is fulfill or really helps with one of our major council goals, which has been linking downtown and that riverfront park. And I believe that will occur with two-waying first state and then court over time. And I've been talking with Mr. Fernandez about it. I think we've got a real shot at two-waying State Street in a really timely fashion and get that, really allow people to experience that. I just think this is just a great report. But I want to second one thing the mayor said. I think it can be overlooked very quickly as we look at kind of the vibrancy, the theater districts and that, which are very good ideas, but the job is tax increment. It is creating value down there that will keep this going for years to come. And I think that we have to make sure, I have great reliance on you all at the department as well as on the Downtown Advisory Board to keep that in mind. Where will we achieve the greatest tax increment? And I'm one of those people who, watching this over the past 9 years, believe still the greatest tax increment probably returns on the north end of downtown where the least value exists. And as we can build that up, we will continue, we will have the engine that will keep this thing going, that lets us do toolbox, lets us do alley murals and all the other really neat things that can be done down there. So I really want to second the mayor's comment on that, that be part of the discussion.
Well, I'll third that.
Okay, good, good.
You know, it's the one thing that I was interested in everybody's ideas in this, but I was also very interested in seeing what are the ideas that are common across all of the groups, the consensus. Everybody had consensus about housing. Everybody had consensus about making it easier to get around the downtown and having a streetscape that you feel safe on and where you want to be out and about. You know, 1 and 2, over and over. You know, so to me, along with concurrence from this body, those are the marching orders of where we need to be spending our 40 hours a week.
Thank you. I want to second the incoming mayor's discussion of two-way streets. I think that's terrific. Really, realistically, the only that can ever be that, I would say, are Marion and Center, because you're coming on and off the bridge, unless the bridges will ever become two-way.
That big bridge you want.
Yeah, that's another story. Yeah. Then I'm interested also in what Chuck said about the northern part of town, because I know when we've had this discussion before, I've been talking about what is happening north of Union Street, and I know from some discussions that you and I have had, along with Andy Wilch and the city manager about that area, that's in the urban renewal district. And so, you know, I'm very interested in what goes on along Front Street there. I mean, there are some viable businesses there, but there are also some very, very, very underused properties. So that would end up with the tax increment. So I think what happens north of Union Street and sort of tangentially, the Union Street bike ped thing will be helpful in the other areas that of transportation, et cetera. Then I want to talk about housing for a bit at the top rank one. I'm looking at this map, and the Paul Gaylor development is not even on this, which is, it's kind of interesting to me, because these were people who said, we're going to put all these red dots on where we think there ought to be housing. And the first development we see is not on a red dot area. So that's kind of, I don't know, a corollary of the law of unintended consequences. I mean, and that goes to what the mayor said about people taking care of their own. We can do everything we want, but it's going to take somebody who is innovative and looks at things and says, hey, here's a spot for it. So whenever that happens, I think we ought to really encourage it. Then I want to talk a little bit about the student housing. I'm familiar with downtown Eugene, and downtown Eugene overbuilt in student housing. I mean, it's just miserable down there now because a lot of outside people, not locals like the development we just had, came in, said we're going to make a lot of money off student housing. Of course, it's easier to do that because they got 25,000 students, and Willamette has, I don't know, 3 or 4. But the flip side of that is downtown Salem is much closer to Willamette University than downtown Eugene is to the University of Oregon. You know, so I would think that there might be some sort of way we could potentially work with Willamette to see maybe we want a dorm on the east end of downtown, which is kind of close to Willamette, which would also take care of their problems, because I'm sure they're concerned about their students. Then I want to talk about the priorities, the top 3 priority projects. It's pretty easy to me to add the other project priorities that get 15 and 14. That seems to me where the cutoff is, not at the top 3, because then you have from 14 up to 17, and that seems to me where you ought to put your focus. And finally, on the magic wands, and you mentioned this in your oral comments, but not in the written comments, pedestrian undercrossing to the park. We know how horrible undercrossings are just from what we're seeing over on Wallace Street and Second, albeit this would just be potentially pedestrians, but I'm wondering if you should also look at going over, and I understand the ADA problems, but I think it would be easier to build in a lift and do some other things, at least try to look at that. And tangentially, since Mayor-elect Bennett brought it up, that would improve part of the problems of traffic coming off the bridge there, to have overpasses rather than pedestrian stoplights coming off on Front Street. That's all, folks.
So to just very quickly respond to a couple of your comments, our student attendees were graduate students. And their comments were very specifically about market rate housing, not student housing. And I think it was very interesting for us to learn how many international graduate school students there are at Willamette, where paying for market rate housing is not an issue. No, these are people that we're talking about how they fly to New York for a weekend to have something to do. So you know, in terms of, you know, if there's any concerns or oversaturation of building market rate housing in the downtown, there's yet another group that's interested in that. And then with regard to the comments about the north downtown area, you know, so we went through the exercise this spring of meeting with the property owners that are in that historic downtown core, just look at an acquisition. The private sector is doing its thing in the downtown core. You know, I think that our next iteration of that is to move north and look at assemblage opportunities there for some sort of mixed-use housing project. And it's also something that we are having conversations with Andy and the Housing Authority about.
What do you mean by assemblage?
Assemblage is if there are 2, 3, 4 lots next to each other where we could acquire and bring them so that we could do a larger project. Okay.
Councillor Bednarz and then Councillor Benjamin.
So I had a couple of things I wanted to talk about. First off, what does constitute downtown? Because there's that line on the north end, I think we would all agree, is morphing north of Union Street. It's now approaching Division, and I'm not sure with the Broadway area being redeveloped. So what is constituted? Is it the URA?
Yeah, our conversations were about the urban renewal area.
So what's the north end of the urban renewal area downtown?
Yes, that's what we're calling North Downtown, and it's really wonky up there. It's not a straight line.
So what street is it?
What's the most northern, what would you say the most northern point is? Gaines?
Gaines?
But then it kind of jogs down and stair steps down as it gets towards the river.
Okay, so it just tells me, I mean, I just want to kind of figure out what we are, and we really can't expand that URA at this point more than, what, 10%? You're probably not going to go down that road at all. So anyway, the second thing I wanted to talk about a little bit was the housing ranking, and it was interesting to see a dot being placed on the Statesman Journal building, or I can't think of is it the medical building that's on the ferry and High Street, but it's interesting that people start parkades. Were they just thinking that we're going to put housing on top of everything?
So at one time, years ago, that was a discussion related to the Marion Parkade.
International.
Yeah.
We had a ground lease that was executed to do housing on top of the Marion Parkade at one point with Western Oregon University.
So, and also to that point, people went a little dot crazy.
Yeah.
They were having a good time with their dots.
I remember the conversation in reference to the Western Oregon and the roof of the Marion Square. Third thing is, what about the building on the corner of Trade and Commercial? That's the old gas station. It's. I know that they've applied for a demolition permit. It won't grant it because it's more of an eyesore than I think a gravel parking lot would be at this point. But what's the status on that?
That's one of the properties, well, in fact, that whole half block. We talked with all of the property owners there about acquiring that whole half block. There is a potential purchaser, developer that is interested in acquiring that piece. The owners would like to demo the property. We just had a very recent communication from them this week. They would like to demo it, but they themselves are not developers. And the process of coming forward with what their redevelopment plan is not something, I think, quite frankly, that they're interested in doing. But they want to reapproach the city to see if the potential purchaser and their future development plan could serve to meet our city requirements, because nothing is going to happen immediately because there is a cloud on the title and they're in the middle of litigation.
Nothing has changed.
So
It's what I
nothing's
remember.
changed.
Okay. Last two things that I want to comment on. First off is, I see that the toolbox only got a 15% vote. I would put it extremely much higher than that at this point. Of all the things that I've seen that has been a catalyst in downtown has been the seed money that's matched by own property owners to revitalize their own buildings. And the McGilchrist and Roth building is a classic example of that right now. So despite the fact that it only getting 15% of the vote in this particular group of people, I would give it a much higher, and as a counselor, I would give it much more importance to make sure it's funded properly and there. And the last comment I wanted to make on was all this conversation, there's not really one conversation, there's nothing in here that I saw in reference to mobility for vehicles. Downtown is the hub of a wheel that reaches out in all directions, and almost anything you do, you've got to go through downtown to get over to West Salem, for sure. But going north to Portland or anything else, you've got to go through downtown. I've said this before, warn it, watch what you do when you do streetscape. It's really nice. But it also, if it hinders the movement of traffic, if it makes it more difficult and slows things down, that's not a good thing. Am I in trouble?
I think I heard my name.
You heard your name.
All of the discussion that we've had about two-waying traffic has been, and this started years ago with Mayor Taylor's Vision 2020 when a lot of this discussion started. And we said that there's some workhorses downtown, and the workhorses are Liberty and Commercial, Marion and Center, and Trade and Ferry.
Trade and Ferry now.
So those front is two-way. So those have to remain one way. Everything else is really up for grabs. And the downtown mobility study really spoke to that. So everything else is up for grabs. It's really then just a matter for two-waying. It's really just a matter. Kristen and I have had this conversation. We're looking at State Street, and the question on State Street is, what do we want to do with the parking? In the years that I've been here, on-street parking has always been sacred. Now all of a sudden, perhaps it's not so sacred. So can we go to parallel parking and bike lanes and one lane in each direction and either a turn lane or a planted median? Or do we need to keep the angle parking in place, and then that means that some other things can't happen? Do we allow traffic to turn left? Do we force them to make right turns and go around? I mean, those are the kinds of questions that we need to have in order to implement the two-waying. But that we can two-way state, court, church, cottage, all of that can be done. Now it's just money because every intersection needs a new signal. So that's $250,000 to $300,000 an intersection. So you just start adding up, and that's where the issues are. But the key is that the workhorses have to remain the workhorses, because that's where the crossing is, and that's where we're a farm to market system in streets, and that's not going to go away anytime soon. But everything else we can do.
Well, I guess I'm hearing that my voice is being heard, and people are cognitive of the issues that I'm talking about.
We are, Counselor.
Thank you.
Counselor
Well, it was interesting to hear that when Pacific Automation came in to do their permitting and have those conversations with the city, that it was right away identified, hey, here's some opportunity for you to put in some additional housing. Here are some developers that you can partner with. And the other things that you mentioned. And I like that in regards to all across the city dealings, whenever a company comes in or even a homeowner, that they come in and that they get more information than they expected. They want to do one thing, but see, well, you could do this, but then what if you did this? I find that refreshing. That gets people excited, and that spurs more activity. In regards to downtown, I noticed they had traffic calming and streetscapes, which I like the streetscape idea, of course. But traffic calming, sometimes that could mean that there's actually a quicker flow. Because I find when I come down to city council meetings that I have a couple of different semi-direct routes, but I'm going to be hamstrung by the bridge because the backup of traffic and everybody coming in at the same time. And with the location of City Hall, just kind of, it stymies everything. And then at the same time, depending on the time of day that I leave here, getting out on and taking a left, getting out of here, especially when I have to get to the far lane, it's already backed up, and I'm like, oh, how do I keep, blinking along? So that's something that I know it's kind of hard to do at this point. The grid is out there. You can do 2-ways and 1-ways and more traffic signals, but, I guess it all comes back down to another bridge of some sort to try to get these people to move somewhere else. Because going north, as it's been mentioned before, coming from the south side, going through downtown, it's a bear. Thank you.
Councilor McCoy?
Thank you. A couple of questions popped up. I don't think they've been asked. The Riverfront Park, you got recreational/commercial kind of facility. If that was to come, how would you envision that being structured, I guess?
In terms of the operational structure? Or
operational,
physical,
or how would the city own the land and lease it to somebody, or would the city develop it, or would you put a, whatever?
Riverwalk.
So this is something that's come up a few times in the last year as Public Works is beginning the master planning process down there. And I understand it's come up in the past as well. So likely it would be a city-owned facility that would be leased out and operated by somebody else. I wouldn't see it as something that we would operate. But I think to be in that geographical area, it would be a facility that we would need to own.
So I guess then, how would you know what to build or how to design it if you didn't know what was going to be there?
Right,
Or are you going to design it, say, here's what we want there, go look for vendors to run it that way?
Yeah, so we own the 4.5 acres. When the bridge is complete, one of the last phases will be to scrape the 4.5 acres, level it and seed it, so that at least we can get park use out of it as we initiate the master plan for the park. So the whole park has to be looked at. That idea of having some kind of building on some of the 4 acres, not the whole piece, has been around for a very long time. And we see a benefit in a concessionaire, that can rent bikes or watercraft, that there might be a small restaurant, that there'd be a meeting hall, et cetera. So as part of the master planning process, we would want to look at those uses. And then as a part of that, what follows is perhaps, if we want to do that, is a market study. Is there a developer that wants to, own it? Maybe we build it, but they manage it, and we have those kinds of...
That was my question, so how exactly that would look.
Those kinds of operations in other places. So we'll see, but that idea has been around, and we see the benefit of doing something like that on
I
that part
agree.
of the park.
You've got that river and you got all that water and it's sort of not being accessed. You can stand there and look at it, but, it could still be something with activities, generating activity, making that park more used and useful than it is right now.
Well, and the same thing could be said over on Wallace Marine Park side. There could be boat rentals, kayak rentals, or canoe rentals over there in conjunction with the boat dock and things like that. It would just almost enhance both sides.
Yeah, we had an entrepreneur come to us that was renting paddle boards right off the gravel bar. We can't do a building at Wallace Marine because that's in the floodway.
Right.
But he came to us and we said, you bet. We issued him a very inexpensive permit, have at it, because we saw the benefit of having those kinds of activities.
So we're going to have paddle boards down there?
They were there this summer.
They were? Well, that's great.
Yeah, he gave it a shot.
You'll have time to learn now.
I'm going to have time for that now.
Don't run into Councilor Anderson when he's swimming on the river.
Councilor Benjamin and then Councilor McCoy.
Well, I just wanted to play on a little bit about that. I kind of brought this idea up about going across on the island out there. My vision was the incubator type situation where it's small storefront property, multiple amounts or different places, where if somebody wanted to start a business like a kite and frisbee shop right there by the, or a bicycle repair shop, something small and one person operation, maybe two-person operation, with not a lot of investment in inventory, they can, an incubator type thing where they can start a business. Instead of trying to locate someplace to rent, is that a good location, is it a bad location? Some of the things that some businesses struggle with, but on a larger scale, which keeps people from going into business anyway. It's too daunting. Well, here's a situation where they could probably rent a space for, or lease it for 6 months and just see how it goes. It may springboard, and then they can move into other facilities, thereby adding more building, more revenue. So I really like that idea. Thank you.
Councilor McCoy.
One last thing, and as you're looking at planning this and moving forward and going to the Downtown Advisory Board, how confident are you that this is representative of those folks downtown that are invested this study with the dots and everything? Because you had 12 different groups. I think you had 69 people, so that's like 5 to 6 people a group. It's and any one of those groups is going to have way more people than that there. And who was there at the and who was there, and how'd you find them, and all those kinds of things. To really say, okay, wow, let's move forward and do this.
I'm going to let Cherie answer that way.
You chicken.
Because she's the one that has the years of relationship with these businesses, so I think she can speak to that better than I
Well,
can.
as she's coming up, I think Kristen made the point earlier that, ultimately you're the most important focus group. So this was an effort to, as Kristen said, kind of validate or not some of the work that was done in 2011 and prior.
Cherie Wargren, Downtown Revitalization Manager. I think that what we're hearing is a shift for the first time since I've been here, and I've been here for 13 years. So those voices that were speaking loudest about less vehicular dependency, more focused on housing, were mature property owners, not necessarily all young millennials. We certainly heard from a lot of the younger people that they're not interested in a sea of cement. They're not interested in having to have your own parking space right out in front of the business that you're going into. A very different conversation than what we've had historically, where, like Peter said, we have to preserve every parking space. That wasn't the conversation universally that we heard. I think that there is this switch towards, we want more pedestrian-friendly, safe, bicycle riding. The Uber thing came up over and over again. We don't even need a car. If you do this right, we won't even have cars. So it was a very different conversation, and we had a lot of the stakeholders that we have had on a lot of our committees that have added value to us year after year after year and have been very supportive of downtown. We had that voice, and a lot of them, kind of stayed pure to, we want to make sure that we have the toolbox. And I think the reason why toolbox didn't come up is that when we gave our presentation on it, we spoke to when the demonstration program failed, and we didn't get the catalytic project out of it, the advisory board turned around and worked with you and said, we just want to have a sufficient amount of money available, and we changed the maximum that you could get on the grant for when these opportunities come up. We're not going to go out with an RFP. We're not going to have this one moment in time. So they know that we've had $1 million, $1.5 million. So that's not where they wanted to put their emphasis. They wanted to put it more on, we want the large amount of monies. We want to have, you there with $749,000 or $740,000. So they were looking more at the acquisition or the opportunity fund. So for me, because the toolbox is something that has done a lot of significant good for downtown. I don't think it was that they don't think it's important. They're not worried about that now because they've seen this continued support for it. So I think that we're changing. I think that you're going to see more people coming and talking to you just to talk about what they're interested in, because we talked about that in all the meetings. When they came up with something, we said, you would love to hear what they're thinking. If they like the bike lanes, come in and talk. come in and share what their ideas are, just like they were sharing with us that you're very interested in hearing what people are thinking about. Some of the stuff, the plaza, the timing's just right now. I mean, look how long it's taken. Who would have thought the county would have come to us and said, let's make something happen on the plaza? Same with the two-lane. So things are changing, but that's always constant. We can count on that. I think that you have support for some of these types of projects that you haven't had in the past, because we basically have shared with those that want those projects, when we come in with those projects, they need to come in here and stand up and help us move those projects forward for them, because it's their voices that mean more to you than ours. And we've said that over and over again. So I'm counting on them coming in and helping move forward the projects that they want. Did I answer your question?
More specifically, in terms of how we selected these people within each of these categories, Cherie and I sat down and largely just from her relationships came up with around 20 or so people in each of these categories that were invited. That sort of self-selected based on people's schedules down to responses, where we had confirmation of 10 to 12 people for each of these meetings and 5 to 7 that actually showed up to each one.
Well, Kristen also asked every time we were at a meeting, who at the meeting thought should come to one of these, because it wasn't limited. More people, the better, because I'm looking at the list, and I remember Hazel Patton saying, well, you need to have more residents. You need to talk to the neighborhood associations. So we invited all of the neighborhood association chairs to come. So we had people that are not necessarily from our downtown stakeholder group, but from neighborhood associations in the south of Salem. And of course, for the anchors, we also had somebody from DAS and the assistant manager from Nordstrom's. So it was a wide breadth, and the major stakeholders were a lot of those that we saw in Vision 2020. We had Salem Hospital. We had Michael Roth from 365 at that time. We had Bryce Peterson from Salem Health. We had Mark Young from PGE. So it was, stakeholders and anchors differently than what we might think is just the major stores. It was basically like Salem Hospital. They are a part of our community. They have a lot of employees, and we've always valued their contribution. So, yeah, I mean, it was, I think every time you were at a meeting, you were asking. And I remember when you were at the chamber giving an overview, you invited anybody that was there, and so we had some realtors come. And one lady in particular, she only came because she wanted to talk about homeless. And that's when we first started with the homeless concern. So I think it was a really great representation of a lot of different people with voices.
Great. One of the groups that I would love to see us really do a professional survey with, and we've never done this before to my knowledge, is to survey the people who live around Salem about what brings them downtown or what could bring them downtown. I think we've listened a lot to the downtown business owners, property owners, residents, and I don't think that we've really had a chance to get the feedback from them. And that's what we're going to have to do in addition to getting people to move downtown who will shop there and eat there and all of that. But we need to have people coming downtown to shop as opposed to going up to Woodburn and Bridgeport Village, and occasionally people are going to go do that, but we want them to have the mindset of going downtown.
That's a very good point. We had tried to create a focus group of people that didn't have a downtown connection.
Yeah, it's hard.
And it was very challenging to do that, but a survey may be a better approach to getting that
we've got some great surveyors now working on the strategic plan. Maybe that's something they could do too, or another one or something. But that was just an observation I've had in the past as well, that we just don't reach them. And I'm really happy to hear that some neighborhood associations came. I think that's really great. But we've got to find out all those shoppers that live around and in West Salem and find out what will bring them downtown more.
And the other question too, why they don't come downtown.
Yeah, exactly. If they don't come, why don't they? So that's great. Well, I think you've just been doing a great job. Lots of heavy lifting, I know, downtown, and I know that the size of the department and the interaction with all of the departments is so crucial. I know you don't work as an island down there. Public Works is involved, planning is always involved. And I really love seeing the way it all collaborates together. So I think kudos to all of you for that.
Thank you.
Okay. City Manager, other comments you'd like to make?
Well, I was going to, if council is interested in, I will put staff on the spot. 'Cause they may not be prepared for this, but perhaps a quick update for council on the holiday
Oh, sure.
information that was recently provided or will be provided to the downtown retailers.
In terms of all of the efforts that are underway.
Efforts and the holiday lighting and just.
Yes. So there are a number of things that are either recently completed or still underway and wrapping up soon that Cherie has also had on our to-do list. She has a very, very long to-do list. And that is improving our lighting in the parking facilities and in our stairwells and in the plaza behind Chemeketa, so that as people are shopping later into the evening, they have better lighting, better sense of security and visibility. New lighting in the Marion garage. I don't know if any of you driven by there. It's bright.
My
bright,
office
bright.
is on that street, and I drive by it every day, and then all of a sudden I said, well, it's dark out when you go home, but I mean, even coming here, that place is packed with cars. I mean, it is packed. It's up onto the roof. You can't see the roof, but the lighting, that must be why.
So, volunteer officers, increased patrols. In terms of the safety and security, do we have other things that I haven't mentioned? And then we've got our Christmas lights.
I think that clearly in Marion, the lighting, big improvement. I think that if you were in Chemeketa and you came down and you saw the increased lighting on the plaza, it's pretty much glows in the dark back there now. So because that's kind of where you come to go out into the rest of downtown. And so that has a completely different look and feel. The benches that kind of inhibited how you walked through there are gone, so it feels more open. And then new signage is going up that will help the police be able to enforce sleeping and trespassing a little bit differently in the parking structures. And then the clean team, I'm meeting with them tomorrow, and with the weather changing, I don't have the numbers, but the last time I asked them how many bags of trash that they collect, it was getting close to 700 to 800. It is, pardon?
How long?
They started in end of May. And that would have been 2, because the third one was watering the hanging flower baskets. They check in with me daily, today by Rite Aid, meth bags and syringes. I don't know if people understand the value that they're bringing right now, because I know that there's areas on private property, they don't go in the hidey holes, those carve-outs for the entrances to the businesses, because that's private property. But they provide a tremendous service. So with the holidays coming, they'll be rotating and going through the parking structures. And they don't provide security, but it will just by default. But they'll be making sure that they're picking up the trash and that they go through the stairwells on their shifts, so that, because facilities comes in the morning and then they don't come back unless there's a code 13 or some special reason to come and deal with it in the stairwells. But, the clean team can deal with those incidences as well. So I think with the police doing their increased trips through the parking structure, the lighting, the signage, the clean team, and then all the education that the downtown police team offers to the businesses to educate them, and please don't leave your things in the car. We don't want the break-ins. I feel really good because we know 95% of what the businesses earn is right now. So we want to make sure that they're successful.
Why don't you talk about the Christmas lights real quickly, too?
Oh, so the 365 committee that's part of the Salem Main Street, this year they wanted to focus on lighting up downtown. And every year, that's a goal because the lights add vibrancy, the lights increase safety. It makes you, it gets you in the mood and in the spirit. And so they came and asked if we would partner with them in some way to help light up. And so the parking fund purchased 166 strings of light, and then a group from the holiday pod has gone out and has asked businesses if they would light up. If they don't have the lights, then they're loaning the lights that we have, asking them then to return it so we can use it again next year. And we're lighting up our windows because we don't want to not participate.
We're partly
so we're
lit
putting
right now.
we're partly lit right now. So yeah,
great.
so the more lights, the better. So that really isn't us. It's more what the downtown property owners and businesses want to do. They started their planning very late in the season, and they didn't want to take on more than they could accomplish because they would really like to have what they do be appreciated and add value versus doing something that they feel that they can't accomplish in the fashion that they want. So I expect next year they'll do something bigger and better, but that's the baby step this year. More lights.
Great. Well, when I saw this list, I just got this, I think today, maybe, on
Yeah, it
my
went out
email.
today.
I don't know. I'm assuming everybody got it today about the downtown Salem holiday shopping season. And it's really impressive. I compliment the city manager and the staff for putting this together because it's everything. It's about cleaning and lighting the parking structures and the increased visibility and presence of police officers, the business outreach and marketing, everything that we really need to help make the downtown more vibrant and make it a safer place for shoppers and employees. So I'm really pleased by this. It's great. So we need to get the word out that we're doing that. It's a great list. We should send it out on Facebook and all of those things that Kenny works on. I think it's a good list.
And we've sent it out on our downtown MailChimp to the businesses that are on that list.
Wonderful. Okay, are there other questions regarding downtown and all of that?
We're already an hour and 10 minutes over.
All right, well, and you still got time to shop because I think the stores are open till 9 o'clock. So we are adjourned.
Yes.